G'day, podcasters. Welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations. I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, 25-4 Coffee, for Troopers, by Troopers. For all your coffee needs, head to www.254.com.au. G'day! Welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Blum. I'm coming to you live from France, and joining me today is the director of the Sir John Monash Centre in Villers-Bretonneux, Rebecca Doyle, and she has joined us today to tell us about the role she has as the director. Hi Beck, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
No, Beck, it's an absolute pleasure to catch up with you in France and in person and have you on the podcast. So, how long have you worked with the Department of Veteran Affairs, and what led you to pursue a career in this area of government?
I've actually been with Department of Veterans Affairs, or DVA, for about 15 years now, so quite some time. And I've been involved in many different facets of DVA. So when I originally came in following my university studies in health, so my roles in DVA were health and health promotion based to start with.
So for you, and you mentioned that you started in the health and that space, so did you have an interest in military history, and did you have family that served, or how did you get into the military space of things in DVA?
I think I probably always held an interest in my own family's military history, and I think for a lot of people it probably really starts at that point too. I think it's the personal stories that really connect and resonate. So for me, I've always been so very proud of my grandfather and his service in the Second World War. And this was his story, and this was part of his story. It was a part of our family story, and I have his slouch hat and I have his medals, and they are by far my most treasured possessions. So I think for me it was really that connection with my pa. I've got a great uncle buried in Kanchanaburi Cemetery in Thailand, and again that's part of the family history. So he was a prisoner of war in the Second World War, and my nan would so often talk about her dear brother Ben, who never came home. And, you know, even after 70 years, that pain and that deep impact that it had on the family was, again, it was such a thread of the family. It was the family story. So certainly for me, it was probably Second World War, to be honest, that held my interest because of my family connections. And for me then, in 2016, I first came across to France. So actually as part of a team with DVA to run the ANZAC Day ceremony at Villers-Bretonneux. And the instant I got on the ground, suddenly a whole new chapter opened up to me. There was the Great War, and you know what it's like when you stand on the ground where the history happened, it just means a whole lot more. So it wasn't until 2016 when I was first here for ANZAC Day that I really kind of got a sense. So it really has probably grown, my professional knowledge of the Great War has probably grown more in my workspace, whereas my connections were more Second World War to start with.
I know exactly what you're saying because yesterday, Beck, I had the privilege of going and visiting my great-great-great-grandfather's grave for the first time in 105 years. And I know the connection you're talking about because I've seen it, my other relatives on the Western Front and Gallipoli, and I just lost it yesterday. I was a mess. It was completing a final pilgrimage, and I say that in every sense of the word, that, and you know it too, because when you came over in 2016, it's a pilgrimage. You are completing pilgrimages for families that can't get over here, and you know they'll never get over to see their loved one, and it's. I completed that pilgrimage yesterday, and I know exactly what you're saying. And with it's World War II, and it's still the same. The pain is still there, and I 100%. It was emotional yesterday, and it was completing that pilgrimage for my family. To stand in front of that grave was just, and we had a service, and it was fantastic. So, and you would see that all the time, being the director.
100%. For me, it's always the personal stories, and it's the personal stories that I am so incredibly privileged to hear from the families that visit, that 100% make my day every single day.
And it makes you want to get out of bed and makes you want to go to the centre and do what you do. And so prior to your appointment as director of the Sir John Monash Centre, you were the director of the Overseas Memorial Section in the Office of the Australian War Graves. What did this entail?
So the Office of Australian War Graves actually sits within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's a role I really love because I saw a lot of my responsibility was to be able to bring forward the stories behind the memorials. Memorials are fascinating things, to be honest. They're so much more than a stone plinth standing in a field. They tell a story. They're there to honour and to remember and respect those who fought, and those that died and those who sacrificed. So for me, they really become this long-lasting reminder. That's what memorials are about, and they ensure that those who died aren't forgotten. And people can come and they can stand there and, like you say, the next generation can learn. They can learn what happened and, they learn the story. So that's, for me, was so much what that role was about, was really recognising what the memorial stood for and how we could share that.
Absolutely. I think for some families, Beck, and it's a real key point you touch on, is that especially over here on the Western Front, Beck, you've seen it as well. You see it up at Villers-Bretonneux on the memorial to the missing with the 11,000 names on the walls. Some of those families, they don't have a grave. For them, having a memorial to go and visit and see their relative's name, and this is all around the world, not just the Western Front. This is at Gallipoli and all around the world. It's for them. I know we all want a headstone, or we want closure, but I think it's just to have a name on a memorial. For families, it's closure for them, and I 100% agree with you that memorials aren't just a stone sitting out in the weather. They mean something. They mean something to the families, and you're 100% correct. So, for you, if you had, and I know VB's, it's close in your heart. Do you have any other favourite memorials other than VB?
It's a good question, because I think too, when you traipse the Western Front, there are memorials dotted everywhere. I think the one that probably appeals to me the most, aside, as you say, from the memorial in Villers-Bretonneux, is the Cobbers Memorial in Fromelles. So it symbolises the aftermath of the battle. It symbolises to me the comradeship and the bravery and the compassion of the troops. So it shows that they wanted to ensure that no one was left behind. So it commemorates the Australians who fought in the first battle that the Australians fought in on the Western Front, which was in Fromelles. And, we know from the history books, we know how horrendous that battle was. We know the losses in that short period of time. But, like I say, I like what it symbolises and shows the aftermath. So after the fighting had ceased in July of 1916, for 3 days, there were hundreds of Australians lying out in no man's land. For days and nights, and despite being under enemy fire, the soldiers were still going out and they were bringing in their mates. They were lying there. Hundreds and hundreds of wounded being carried in, and the stretcher parties, and even carrying them on their backs. And that's what, and if listeners are familiar with the Cobbers Memorial, that's exactly what it depicts. It shows that. So Sergeant Simon Fraser was of the 57th Battalion, and he was in the Australian Imperial Force and was one of those soldiers who tirelessly for 3 days and nights just went out and brought people in. And as he was out rescuing one of the wounded comrades, he heard an Australian call out, and he said, "Don't forget me, Cobber." So Sergeant Fraser and the other Australian troops went out, found where this voice was, and found this man and brought him back in. So the Cobber Memorial depicts him. It shows Sergeant Fraser, and it represents those 3 days and nights, to me, Australian mateship at its core. And there's a lovely quote I've actually got written down here. So Sergeant Fraser, he wrote a letter home to his brothers shortly after that battle, and he said, "It was no light work getting in with a heavy weight on your back. You had to lie down and get him on your back, and then rise and duck for your life with the chance of getting a bullet in before you were safe." And that really just shows they were lying on the ground in the mud, fire over their head, wounded all and dead around them, lying down so that they could get these wounded on their back. Sadly, Sergeant Fraser never made it home. So this was July 1916 in Bulcourt in the May of the following year. Just over 50 kilometres from where his feats of bravery were noted. He was killed in action and his body was never recovered. So he's actually named on that Australian Memorial to the Missing that you mentioned in Villers-Bretonneux. So I can tell by your face you understand like I say, when I talk about the family stories, what they mean, and my family story and the story of the memorials, it's the stories. That's what gets me, and that's why I do what I do. Yeah.
I'm glad you said Fromelles Beck, because we were there yesterday and we were hearing the stories of the battle, and I've been there. This is my 4th time back, and I had the personal pilgrimage for my family, but I also had the pilgrimage for every other Australian family. And hearing the historian talk about the men getting cut down, and hearing that quote from Simpson back to his, to his family, it just proves the carnage of what Fromelles was, and horrendous. And you can't imagine, and when you're on that ground, Beck, you've seen that ground, you've walked that ground, it is as flat as a pancake. There is just no, where the Australians took off from, that line of they were lambs to the slaughter. They really were lambs to the slaughter. And it's hearing that, it's a special. It's going to VC Corner, going to the Cobbers Memorial. It's the way they've done it and the way it's remembered, the battle and the men that fought there. It is a beautiful, beautiful. I think it's very fitting in the way that they are remembered, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That's your second, apart from VB, that's your second favourite. So yeah, because it does a really powerful story, and it's one of my favourite ones too. So I really enjoy that one as well. So with you having boots on the ground, what do the people of the Somme region, particularly Villers-Bretonneux, think of so many Australians travelling 12,000 miles to see the cemeteries and walk the battlefields after more than 100 years?
Adam, it's an incredibly fascinating part of the world. It's not like anywhere I've ever seen before. So the commitment to remembrance of the people that live here is just mind-blowing, really. To drive around or walk around the little tiny towns that are in the area and see Australian flags flying outside their town hall is really something quite remarkable. So what I find from the people in the Somme region is that they've grown up and they've been raised with this remarkable commitment to remembrance. It's part of their upbringing is they have foreign soldiers buried in their soil, and so they will look after them forevermore, and so if Australians coming, they're welcomed with open arms. They're so excited to see them here. They're travelling across the world to walk the battlefield, like you say, so they help and they guide and they tell stories and they embrace that. So I think they understand how hard that is sometimes for families to come, and that a lot of families can't come. So I think that kind of also feeds into why they're so committed to do what they do. So it's wonderful. It's a really wonderful experience.
Absolutely, and you hear the old cliche stories back that the French are rude, and they're not. When you say hello and they say, "What are you here for?" and you say, "Honouring the Australians," and they're amazing. They really are. Every time I've been here, they've always been lovely, and same as the Belgians as well. They love you, and especially around VB, you see it. They absolutely embrace the Australians, and it's amazing. So, how did you become the director of the Sir John Monash Centre, and when were you appointed to this role?
So I started towards the end of 2020, and as I mentioned before, I've been working with Department of Veterans Affairs for quite a while, and it's something that I've been really proud to be able to do and support many different areas of work there. And I think for me, when my interest in commemoration really started to deepen and my appreciation grew for the role of remembrance, when I look back now, it's almost like I started a bit of an apprenticeship. So I became part of the team that delivered a variety of centenary services. So from 2016 through to 2018 in Villers-Bretonneux and Polygon Wood and La Hamal. Then after that, in 2019, I went across to Gallipoli as part of the team. So I was growing this understanding, this appreciation, and growing these experiences. And so after that, then I came back and then moved into that overseas memorials role. So I think each stage has kind of given me more experience and a greater understanding of the work, and that sort of ultimately led me to working towards applying for this role. And that, for me, in the 2 years leading up, included me undertaking language studies. You know, it was a role that I coveted. I really wanted to be able to be in the space, so I undertook learning French so that I could, you know, apply and, you know, sort of be in the best possible position I could be to be able to come and do this role. So, yeah.
So, Beck, for most people who would be wondering, what does the role entail?
So it is managing the Sir John Monash Centre, and it's also being quite a big support to the ANZAC Day services here. A lot of commemorative services locally as well. So as I said, the towns are very much committed to remembrance. So I'm honoured to be able to go to a lot of those as well, and to be really attending those and representing the Australian government. I mean, gosh, what a role, what an honour. You know, I get to do that. I get to be representing the Australian government and the people in a lot of those little town services. So, yeah.
So for you, Beck, and I mean, from a career perspective, is this probably the greatest role you've had? And what does it mean to you to be the director of the Sir John Monash Centre?
I think each role brings its own thing, but it's probably the role I'm most honoured to be able to do. I love it, and for me, each and every day, my work allows me to share stories of Australian soldiers and their families and the impact of the Great War. So for each day, for me, I get to ensure that their sacrifice wasn't in vain. There's not a lot of roles where you really get to do that, you know, and you'll have roles before and I'll have other roles after, but I think that certainly is what I'm probably most proud of, is being able to do that and being able to honour that. So, you know, we're talking about headstones and names on memorials and things before. So the Sir John Monash Centre, and for those that don't know, it's right alongside the Villers-Bretonneux Military Cemetery, and it's sort of tucked right in behind the Australian National Memorial. So for me, each day I actually have a visual reminder of why I do what I do. And I'll often take a moment during the day just to walk outside, and I'll find a headstone and stand there and I say the person's name, you know, to me in my head. Because if when you're working and you've always got things in your mind, you're thinking about work and you walk into the car and I've got to do this and that, but I don't allow myself to do that when I'm in the cemetery. So I will make sure I say the person's name. They've not been forgotten in that moment. You know, I've got to stand there. So I'll tell you one of the epitaphs this week, actually, when I went and just stood out, it was, he laid down his life for his country. And that's what I do. That's why I do it. Like that, you know, it's so powerful, you know, and I get to hear firsthand, I was saying, those family stories of visitors come, and that's what it is. It's the stories for me. So I had, actually this week, I sat in the cafe at the Sir John Monash Centre, and there was a group of Australians travelling, and I had a coffee with the most delightful lady who was on her trip of a lifetime from Australia. So we sat and we talked about her grandfather, and she brought photos of him in the First World War and a photo of him standing on the land in Villers-Bretonneux. And we were sitting there on that land having a coffee, and she was filled with emotion, and she was so proud of her grandfather, and she was taking photos and she was sending WhatsApp messages back to her family back at home. And, you know, to be honest, I'm just so humbled I get to share that. You know, that's what it means to me.
Absolutely. And I think, Beck, what I get from you telling me that story, I can see that it puts a smile on your face and it lights up your face of telling these stories. And what it is, I think, for you and for others, it like, especially working at the Sir John Monash Centre, and you only have to walk out and go up into the cemetery. If you're having a bad day, you can look at those men that have paid the ultimate sacrifice, and you look and go, my worst day is probably, it won't even come close to what the men who fought and are lying in these cemeteries faced. And, you know, it puts it really into perspective of what, you know, and I feel we can draw a lot from these men, and we can learn a lot from their sacrifice. And I feel sometimes we judge, oh my God, life's so hard, and we go, well, actually, is it as hard as what these men had it? And it's a perfect example of what you've said. Absolutely.
And as I was saying, we're talking about memorials and headstones and what they represent, and sometimes it's that as well. It is that learning through the generations, and you hope that changes people's perspective. You hope people approach things differently. You'd like to think that it would stop world wars and things, all that type of stuff, because it does. Yeah, everything else kind of dissolves away when I walk out the door and I stand at a headstone and read that he laid down his life for his country.
Oh, it's powerful. It's powerful, and I think sometimes we're very, like you said, it's just we learn through what these men went through and endured, and I think it's so important to teach that to the next generation of it's important. The sacrifices made for their freedoms, it's right there. You looking at it, and you're reading the epitaphs, and you walking through the cemeteries, and you see the personal pain to the families, and that's what it is. It's remembrance. That's what we do. We're remembering these men and women who have fought for us. And I think for you too, it's even more poignant because you're in a foreign country. It's not we're remembering them at home. You're remembering them in France, but also of the sacrifice that they made for your homeland, and that's an even more powerful thing. So absolutely. So who determines content and the interactive style of the information delivered at the Sir John Monash Centre?
Yeah, it's a fascinating place. It really is a wonderful place to explore, and it's got an extensive collection of original film footage. So Australian War Memorial, the Imperial War Museum, Australian Sound and Film Archive, and then there's private and uncovered collections that the researchers actually discovered whilst they were researching for the centre's content. And they did a lot of that to identify men and women who could share their stories in their own words. So the historical researchers and the development team used letters and diaries of soldiers, and that's used to create the content. So they were able to bring these stories to life. So they interweave the words of the soldiers from those letters and journals with the film footage, and the archive footage and the images. And then there's a few dramatic recreations, mixed in with that. And that really just takes the visitor on a journey. It provides that emotional experience of what the soldiers saw. So and it gives that central narrative that will reflect the experiences of there's 295,000 Australians who served on the Western Front. So we tell their stories there. So it was a real big immersion into the historical archives that allowed those stories to come out. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what are some of the new things that you have learnt about Australians in the Great War since becoming the director?
So much. So much. What I've probably loved learning the most is about General Sir John Monash. So our centre bears his name, and he was a commander who led the Australian Corps with such outstanding success on the Western Front in 1918. And I've really loved learning about his story and his strategic approaches to warfare, and his approach to leadership, and his ability to inspire the troops, and his innovation and his care and his compassion. And I think a lot of people are familiar with his story in and around Le Hamel, and just leading into that, a couple of months before, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and appointed to command the Australian troops. Now, they were under the British General William Birdwood at the time. So up until then, British officers had always commanded Australian troops. So even that in itself was quite a big thing. Afterwards he was knighted on the battlefield. It had been over 200 years since someone had been knighted on the battlefield. And the July 4th attack in 1918 in Le Hamel, where he led this meticulously planned attack, and such, that considerable attention to detail and clever tactics deployed in the lead up. That's my favourite part of the story, I think, is what he thought, all the details he thought through, and he really secured his reputation there as such an incredible tactician and leader. So in that attack, in the days prior, he ensured every night that the German lines were bombarded with gas and smoke shells. So they were conditioned every night. Gas, smoke, put on our gas masks. And so they did that each time. So then on the attack, the day of the attack on the 4th of July, it was only smoke shells that were fired. There was no gas. But of course they were conditioned. So gas masks were on, their communication was impeded, they couldn't hear properly, they couldn't see properly. So it was the very essence of a smokescreen for the advancing troops, you know, and it was a trigger for them to do all those things, and it impaired so much. And it was just those little things, you know, it was the thought and the innovation, but his ability to really lead and inspire troops. I think he was an incredible leader, such a well-respected leader, and I'm learning so much about all the family stories and the battle stories and the strategy and the tactics, and you know, every day you learn things, but I've probably loved the most learning a lot more about him. Yeah.
It's a, like, for you, it'd be like the personal stories are very touching, but to also learn about, you know, our commanders and the men that, you know, that they were leading, and so I understand it. I absolutely understand that. It'd be fascinating to, you know, every day there would be no two same days. Like everything, like, you know, one day to the next during the week would be the Monday to the Friday would be so different. So it's very special. So apart from, and this question's going to be hard to ask because it's going to be a tough one for you, because I know VB is close to your heart. So apart from VB, which other Australian battlefield has resonated with you the most, and why?
I don't think I could probably choose one battle or one battlefield. You knew I was going to say that.
I knew you were going to say that.
You know, I think that's the thing, is when you do learn so much and you get an appreciation for each and every one, but you learn the horrors of each and every one at the same time. And to be honest, you know, it's that collective of all that actually probably resonates with me more, because you're on the ground, you're learning about those battles, and you learn the hardships faced, and you learn the sheer numbers, and it gives you a different perspective. It gives you that bigger picture of what it was like, battle upon battle upon battle, and day upon day, and life behind the lines, and the horror, and the distance from home, and the numbers. You know, it's the numbers, and when you look at that as a collective, that's probably what resonates more for me. You know, it's the accumulation of all those little stories that actually probably impact me the most. Yeah.
And I think too, Beck, you know it too. You've been to many cemeteries, you've walked those cemeteries, and you can get lost in those cemeteries you could get lost in those cemeteries for days. Some of them have got 10,000 headstones in them. Some have got Tyncott in Belgium, the biggest Commonwealth war graves, has got 12,000, almost 12,000 names. So you've got a lot of names, and I think when you walk that ground, and what you've said as well, I think battlefields talk to us in their own way, and they talk to us and when they want to tell you something, they'll reveal it. And when you walk those cemeteries, it's the scale. You can't you can read books, you can watch documentaries, but until you walk that ground and until you walk those cemeteries, it's the true scale. And you've seen that firsthand. I've seen that firsthand, and it's the shock. It's the shock when you first come to the Western Front or any battlefield around the world, and you walk through those cemeteries. It's the shock, and you see them, and it's the pain. It's the personal pain to the families, and I 100% know exactly what you're saying. And yeah, I knew that question would be a hard one, because it generally is, because it's like saying, well, it's like asking a parent, well, who's your favourite child, and it's a tough one. It's a real
can't help but be impacted by all the individual that's the addition of all that creates such a bigger story.
Absolutely. So how was the location of the Sir John Monash selected, and were there any other locations considered before Villers-Bretonneux was chosen for the National Memorial?
For the centre, for the Sir John Monash Centre, you know, I think it's located on land that's really quite significant. So a lot of, you know, feasibility studies, you know, naturally were done and looking into the area, and, you know, I think being built on the land where so many fought and fell, and like I say, it's nestled in behind the Australian National Memorial, and it's alongside this memorial, that there's almost 11,000 names forever etched in stone, no known grave, and then you've got the memorial that's right alongside the Villers-Bretonneux cemetery, and there's over 2,100 Commonwealth soldiers in their final resting place. So I think that the land that was chosen really honours what the significance of that region really was, and it's really done to complement and build on that story. And Villers-Bretonneux itself, it was a site of a really highly successful battle involving Australian troops. So that sort of took place in the final year of the war, of the 24th to 26th of April in 1918, and the town was successfully recaptured at the end of the German Spring Offensive too. And when you're looking at the dates, and obviously, when you look back now, 3 years after the landing on Gallipoli, so it's really quite symbolically tied in with some successful Australian battles, particularly in Villers-Bretonneux in that final year of the war.
I think what it shows too, Beck, is and how far we came from the disaster at Gallipoli 3 years earlier to what we were doing, and up to that point, the German Spring Offensive, and then what we'd go on to do in the months leading into the final victory and when the armistice was signed in November. It really shows how far the ANZACS had come from Gallipoli, and it's like you said, it's a really poignant to put it there. It's poignant to put it there, to have it on as the significant date of from the 24th, the lead up to the 25th, and then taking the town, by the 26th. It was it was. I mean, there's other locations that it could have gone, like Pozieres, where we had 23,000 Australians killed. It could have gone there. Hamel being Monash's greatest victory, but I think it fits. I think it's fitting to have it at Villers-Bretonneux, and Villers-Bretonneux, it's an easy location to get to. It's right in the middle, so I think it works really well, and I think it was designed to be easily accessed for people, and I think it works really well, and I think they got it right. So yeah, I think it works. So, but for you, and I guess for others who you obviously work there, but the Sir John Monash Centre, how has it been received by visitors who you see every day, and what do the locals think of the Sir John Monash Centre?
I think for the locals, a lot of them really do like having it in their area, and I think when we talk about it really complementing the landscape, it's not easy to see from the outside, and I think that's part of the beauty so much of the architectural design and development, that it's in the ground, it's in behind that. So if you walk up, you really actually don't see it. So in the area, and we were talking before about people in the Somme and their commitment to remembrance, it's not unusual for them just to go for a weekend walk and wander through a cemetery and then wander down the ramp entries and walk into the centre and sort of look and go, wow, I didn't know this was here in my region. So, I think they really enjoy having that there, for visitors and locals too. I think the fact that they can come and they can get a different sense of the story that they'll get in the region, they'll really be able to understand what the soldiers went through from having that experience. And then usually what you see is from when they walk in and when they walk out, it's quite different. They come in and I'm here, I'm so excited to be here, I've been wanting to come for such a long time, and then they leave and gosh, it was hard. I'm sad, I'm impacted by that, and they're really quite reflective, and so it does tell a story, and it does take them on a journey, and for them to then be able to leave the centre and walk outside, and there is the memorial and there is the cemetery, and it just really brings it full circle, I think, for a lot of people, because it just makes sense. They understand that whole picture.
So for you and having school groups that come through, how is that a challenge for you to get them to understand why they're there, and how do you and the team go about getting them to show respect and know the reason why they're there? How do you face that challenge?
I think, a lot of work and a lot of credit goes to the teachers too. I think those teachers that bring their students here, they do have an understanding and they do prepare them for that, and it's an important part of their curriculum. And to be honest, we don't really find a lot of problems with kids coming. You know, they do immerse in it. It's a highly technical centre. There's technology. They get to use an app. So I tell you, a school group that gets to use their phone for a day, it's great. They love it. So the technology brings them in. And I think that's part of why the development was that high level of interactivity, because it does engage the younger audience quite well. You know, so they're able to really, they can touch screens and they're allowed to touch. The teachers love it. The teachers will often say, gosh, we go to a museum and we're forever saying, stop touching, don't touch, don't touch. And now they're like, come on, can we go? Teacher, can we leave? And it's the opposite here. You know, they can touch things, they can do things, and the teachers are having to say, come on, it's time to go, we've got to go. So I think the interactivity has hit on quite a good mark that they get to guide themselves a little bit. You know, I think they get to pick what they listen to, and they get to, if there's a particular story that they like, they can immerse in a little bit more. So, and we do have school group activities as well. So give them a tour of the cemetery, talk about the memorial, take them into a multi-purpose room where they can sit and they can, particularly for the younger ones, we've got some replica uniforms, they can try them on. For the older ones, they get to sort of look for clues and uncover the identity of a soldier, and when they do, that soldier that they actually find is actually buried out in the cemetery. So then they go to the headstone, and we encourage them to do a little service and to learn what that remembrance part of it is. So then it's not them coming to learn a part of their curriculum or something, they're actually experiencing remembrance and understanding. So I think that's a formula that works quite well with children. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's a really great way to engage them and get them to, and like we said, sacrifice and see, you know, that these people, they're not just photos on a wall. They're a person, and that every life matters to, you know, to someone. It's everyone's got a family, and it's, yeah, they're not just an old a picture on a wall that no one remembers, and I think it's a really great way to get the kids to engage, and I think that's actually a bit of forward thinking actually. So it
really connects them. I think that emotional connection is where you're going to engage and where you're going to learn and understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what are some of the reasons? Like, obviously you're on the ground a lot. You know, you're very engaging with people who are coming into the centre. What are some of the reasons people give you that for coming to the Western Front and obviously coming to the memorial? And what do they say to you when they go through the centre? And what are the comments?
For so many people, it is the pilgrimage. It is the trip of a lifetime. It is to stand where their ancestors fought, or it is to find their ancestor's name on a headstone or on a memorial wall. And often they are the first family member. And this is still, you know, you're over 100 years later, exactly like your experience yesterday. You know, I mean, it's astounding, isn't it, that this is so much a part of so many families, and it can take a very long time for them to come. So we get to become a little part of that story, you know, and for the centre it's a really nice hub for them to come to, and they come researched, you know, they come and they have their folders and they have their stories, and so when they come over, it's not just coming to the Sir John Monash Centre for a day and then they head back to Paris or they continue on their journey. They tend to come to the region for a few days, and they will go to many other sites along what we call the Australian Remembrance Trail. They'll go to Fromelles, Pozières, Bulcourt, they'll head up to Ypres and to Meningate and Plug Street and Polygon Wood, and so it's that whole part of the story. So we're a little piece of that, and we're a really nice sort of anchor for them to then be able to go and come and ask questions and share their stories. They love to share their stories, and yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's something you touched on. Like, it's over 100 years ago, but it affected me so much yesterday that I didn't know my great-great-great-grandfather, but it touched me so much to stand where he's buried and be the first in the family. We had it today before I caught up with you to do the podcast. We had another lady that she'd never met her great uncle. And she burst into tears this afternoon, and we did a service with her at a cemetery, and she grabbed me and she just said, "I get it now. Yesterday you were like this," and she's like, "I didn't think I was going to cry. I didn't even know him," and that's the power of what it is. It's, you know, and like you said, it's a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage to not only just complete for families, and some families don't have any relative on the Western Front. They just feel it's important to get over and do a pilgrimage and just remember these men. And they Beck, they were from a different generation. They endured so much, and I think you're right in the sense that we have an obligation to remember these men and remember what they did and the sacrifice they made. And I think you're doing it in a very, you are so lucky to do what you do. Like, and I know you do not take it for granted. You really do understand it. And every time I see what you're doing with the centre, and it's, you do a fantastic job, and your team is doing a fantastic job of keeping that the remembrance and how we should remember them. So well done on that. It's
a team that really understands and really appreciates and enjoys their work, and it's very special to them. So thank you. That's really lovely.
No, absolutely, and I think it's important to hear that, Beck. Like, it's especially from Australians back home, because you are, in a sense, it's a very unique role that you're in, because you're isolated in a sense, because you're not in Australia. You're in Europe. Yeah, okay, Europe's great. It's a beautiful country and everything, but you're away from your family. You're away from your friends, and it is. So to give you that, to hear that you're doing a great job from Australians back home, yeah, you are. So well done on that. So how did the onset of COVID? So you came over at a really crazy time when the world went crazy. How did the COVID pandemic affect the operations of the Sir John Monash Centre, and what did you have to do to keep the centre operating?
So yes, I did come when the world was pretty much turning on its head. So when I arrived at the end of 2020, sort of COVID was really, really high levels in Europe. So 3 days after I arrived, France went into its second national lockdown. And at the time, we don't know how long these things are going to last. They're looking at their numbers, they're looking at the hospital capacity and how the intensive care is coping, and the seasons. And, that ended up being 8 months. So, my first 8 months were in lockdown, and to be managing a centre whose doors are closed was a little bit of a challenge. So, and I mean, as you know, the principal means of exhibition at the Sir John Monash Centre is audio and video and interactive media, and so we deliver an immersive experience, and very hard to be immersing visitors in a centre with its doors closed. So, for us, we really embrace different ways of engaging. So we had, as I said, it was a really extended period of closure. So social media, we developed some online conferences. We took a group of school children in Australia on a virtual tour of a centre in France. So we tried different things which we probably wouldn't have done to the same level. And our team really embraced that opportunity. They learnt new skills. We discovered we had a couple of team members with a real hidden talent for developing videos. I didn't know, because we had that. In the end, it was a luxury to be able to really explore and do different things. And, for this period of time, we did a bit of a mini-series of videos because people were contacting us going, I can't wait to come. We want to come into the centre. And so we did if you can't come to us, we'll come to you type of approach. And we would share little snippets of what would happen in the centre. And it was really important for me at that time too. So as a leader of the team, we had to ensure what work we were doing all sort of shared a common goal. So we were developing, like I say, it ended up being 8 months, and we didn't know. So from month to month, you're waiting for it to end, and are you going to be able to reopen? So that's very draining. It's really hard on your mental health to not know where the end is. Where's the finish line? When can you reopen? So, we're a small team, and we were all working from home. We couldn't work in the office space. I hadn't sat in an office space with these people for my first 8 months, so it was really important for me to just ensure that work, had a common purpose, because that was really important for our well-being and our team cohesiveness as well. So we did things differently, and we kept our purpose as the central thread, to the different things we try. We're a centre who is there to commemorate the fallen, so we really made sure that was part of what we were doing. And We've been able to now remain open for just over 12 months. So that was a lovely, middle of the year last year to be able to open the doors. The first 6 months were still very hard because people weren't travelling, so the visitor numbers were incredibly low. So whilst we had this surge and this excitement of, great, we can open, we can be there, hardly many people were able to come. So Aussies are returning now, so it's...
Yeah. It's good to be sitting. It's good to be sitting the other side of you, Beck, and actually saying, Beck, I'll actually get to walk in the centre and see you, and yeah. So no, it's great, and so what are the plans for you going forward with the vision of what the Sir John Monash Centre is? What do you, and what are the future, like? Obviously, we're now past the centenary period. So what is the future plans of the Sir John Monash Centre?
Look, I think it just continues to grow and continues to engage. Each chapter of the Sir John Monash Centre is going to be how we reach people, how we share the stories. We don't know sometimes how that's going to be until we do it. And COVID gave us that vision. It ended up being a blank slate. We were really able to engage differently. We linked in with a lot of the battlefield tour guides, and they were doing online conferences for us. That was an industry as well that for 2 years fell over, so you connected with stakeholders in a different way, and you reached out to people in a different way. So to me, I think that's how something's always going to continue to evolve in a beautiful way. It just builds on the success that it is, and it continues to bring people in, and people come looking for what they'll look for, and the centre will be able to do that.
Absolutely. And for you, Beck, what are your, obviously, because your posting will end, what are your plans going forward for career-wise now?
Gosh, that's a good question.
Sorry to ask that one, Beck.
No, that's all right. Look, it's interesting because there's something in me at the moment that is so captured by what my experience is here that I want to work out a way to take that forward. I've learnt so much. I've learnt so much from the community here, and I've seen their spirit of remembrance, and I'd like to study that further and work out the best way to apply that to other programs and to back in Australia and to policy and things. So, whilst I've come here to do a role, I've actually gained so much from it as well. So my next chapter will be where I take those learnings, because I don't want to lose those.
Absolutely, it's a really key point you touch on, and I think, Beck, it's been great to have you on and just tell us a little bit about the Sir John Monash Centre and the role you play, and I just want to say on behalf of all Australians, thank you for what you're doing to keep remembrance alive and these men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice for us, and thank you for your team and what they're doing, and I really believe you've got it right, and the way that you're remembering our veterans and also the men and women that have gone before us. So Rebecca Doyle, thank you so much for coming on and just telling us a little bit about what you do. So thank you.
Adam, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and I'm humbled and honoured, and I really appreciate your sentiments. So thank you for letting me share my story.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts.